I've spent 10 years teaching families how to survive false accusations, but I never thought I'd become one. The irony hit me in the quiet hum of my office when the email arrived. Subject line: Administrative Review Notice. I opened it expecting a misfiled report. A bureaucratic mistake. But my name was there in black and white. Accused of child endangerment by Angela Crosswood, my husband's sister. And verified by Michael himself. The words blurred for a moment, my pulse loud enough to drown out thought. I called him immediately, and he answered as if nothing had happened. When I asked why his name appeared on the complaint, he sighed like I was being dramatic. "I had to," he said, his voice steady, almost rehearsed. "It's about credibility, not about marriage." That line cut through the air sharper than any betrayal I'd imagined. I sat there listening to the hum of the line, waiting for a heartbeat that never came. At that moment, everything I believed about loyalty collapsed. I wasn't a wife or a partner anymore. I was a liability to be managed. I could almost hear the whispers forming around my name. The quiet judgments that follow a scandal before it's even proven. The walls of our home, the life we built, suddenly felt like evidence in a case I didn't know I was part of. I closed my laptop and stared at the muted reflection on the screen. "You chose their lie over my truth," I whispered. Not to him, but to the empty room that still smelled like the coffee he brewed that morning. Somewhere inside me, something steady snapped into focus. If credibility was all that mattered, then I would make truth undeniable. By morning, the review notice had become an open secret at the office. My supervisor avoided my eyes. Her tone clipped when she said, "You're being placed on administrative leave until the investigation concludes." The words were polished, professional, but the silence that followed sounded like a verdict. I walked out carrying nothing but my badge, as if my entire career had been erased with a memo. Inside the conference room that afternoon, Veronica Kane from Communications sat across from me, her smile thin enough to cut. "You know," she said, tapping her pen, "stories spread faster than facts. Might as well get used to it." Her tone carried amusement, not sympathy. And it told me she already knew too much. I realized then that this rumor wasn't growing, it was being fed. At home, Michael was waiting with a glass of wine like he was comforting a child. "Maybe you should take a break," he said softly. "Let things calm down." I looked at him, steady and cold. "You mean until I'm unemployed?" He hesitated, said something about optics, about how people talk. I wanted to laugh at the word people, because it meant him too. That night, my inbox filled with new allegations. Each one written like a script, exaggerated, specific, rehearsed. Angela had sent statements from 2 women at her salon claiming they'd witnessed my temper. I could see the coordination in every line. The precision of someone who'd practiced manipulation long before this. The absurdity almost made me calm. When a lie becomes too perfect, it starts showing its seams. Michael came into the room while I was reading, his voice low, almost rehearsed again. "You've got to admit, sometimes you lose control." I turned to him and said, "That's what you tell yourself when you need a villain." His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. He didn't need to. Silence was confession enough. As the night bled into dawn, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by copies of the complaints, tracing their language like fingerprints. Every phrase echoed the same hand, the same pattern, the same source. For someone who claimed to love me, Michael had built quite the case against me. And somewhere between the lines of those false statements, I stopped feeling fear and started taking notes. It was almost midnight when I remembered the doorbell camera. The thought came quiet and clean, like oxygen after smoke. I opened the archive from that afternoon and there she was, Angela. dragging her nephew toward the porch, whispering something that made the boy whimper. Then she looked straight into the lens and smiled. Not by accident, but on purpose. The kind of smile that knows it's being recorded. I saved the clip twice. One to my desktop and one to a drive that lived in my purse. When I met Detective Rowan Miles the next morning, I told him, "I think this is bigger than a family fight." He watched the footage once, leaned back, and said, "If this metadata holds, it's not just perjury, it's conspiracy." Hearing the word out loud made my chest steady instead of tight, for the first time. What they did had a name. He explained the process, how timestamps and file integrity could prove tampering, and asked if I wanted to pursue it formally. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want truth on paper." He nodded and told me he'd authenticate everything. When I left his office, the air felt different, as if the balance had shifted just a little in my favor. At home, I couldn't stop thinking about how easily lies multiply when people think you're too stunned to count. I sat at Michael's desk, opening the shared email he'd set up years ago for bills. Inside the drafts folder sat a document named Statement Revision. I opened it and froze. It was written by Veronica, dated 2 days before the accusation. With edits from Michael's account, each sentence matched the phrasing of Angela's complaint almost word for word. When he came home, he noticed the printer still warm. "You've been digging again," he said, his tone half warning, half weariness. I didn't look up. "Funny," I replied. "You were too." He muttered something about misunderstanding, but the tremor in his voice gave him away. It was the sound of a man realizing the story he built had an ending he couldn't control. That night, I placed the printed statement beside the video drive. I didn't call Rowan or Carla yet. I wanted them to keep moving, to believe I was cornered. People reveal their truest selves when they think the trap is still open. So I waited, calm as glass, while the house around me pretended to sleep. The lies had structure now, and so did my plan to dismantle them. The truth wasn't coming quietly, it was waiting for its turn to speak. Michael's voice filled the auditorium before I saw him. He was standing behind the podium, speaking about family resilience to a small crowd. His tone smooth, his gestures confident. Veronica sat in the front row, head tilted in admiration, as if she hadn't written the lies that nearly ended me. I watched from the back, the hum of the projector masking my heartbeat. He said, "We've all faced storms at home, but truth always wins." The irony almost made me smile. I opened my phone, the email draft already waiting. Attachments lined up like ammunition. When I hit send, the files went to every employee on the distribution list, the footage, the metadata report, and Veronica's statement draft signed by Michael. The timing was merciless. As his words echoed, the projector behind him flickered and shifted. My footage appeared on the large screen, the doorbell recording. Angela pulling the boy, her hand striking. The forced tears. Then the next slide. Veronica's message thread. Her notes on how to frame the report for emotional impact. A gasp rippled through the room, the kind that cuts through air like static. Michael froze mid-sentence, his eyes catching the glow of the screen. "This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, reaching toward the remote. I stood then, calm, the crowd parting without a sound. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, my voice carrying more certainty than I'd felt in months. Veronica tried to stand, but her knees gave way before words did. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. Behind me, the whispers swelled. Half disbelief, half thrill. As I stepped into the corridor, I could still hear Michael's voice cracking through the speakers, pleading for control he'd already lost. I didn't need to see his face to know the truth had done its job. False victories always end the same way: they break from the inside before they shatter in public. Outside. The air smelled cleaner than it had in weeks. My phone buzzed with unread messages. But I didn't open them. I had seen enough confessions disguised as explanations to know what came next. For the first time since it began, I felt stillness instead of anger. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It plays on loop for everyone to see. The conference room smelled of stale coffee and restraint. Michael sat at the far end of the table, his posture defensive, his eyes darting toward every door like escape might still be an option. Angela clutched a folder that shook every time she breathed, and Veronica kept her gaze fixed on the polished surface in front of her. Carla leaned close to me and whispered, "Let them talk first. Guilt sounds best in their own voices." The chairwoman cleared her throat and said, "We're here to review the ethical complaints filed regarding fabricated evidence and false reporting." Michael spoke before she finished, his voice already trembling under the weight of explanation. "This got out of hand," he began. "It wasn't meant to go this far." I watched him try to sound remorseful, but every syllable bent around the same defense intent over impact. When it was my turn, I said, "You weaponized the system I've dedicated my life to." He flinched, pretending not to understand. "You made me invisible for years," he said. "I just wanted control back," I answered softly. "You got it. You controlled everything, even the lie that broke you." The silence that followed was its own confession. Angela tried to interrupt, her words tumbling over each other. "We were protecting the family," she said, voice shaking between defiance and panic. Carla responded before I could. "You don't protect family by falsifying sworn statements," she said evenly. "You destroy them." Angela turned to me, desperate. "You've always been cold, Deanna. You never cared about us." I met her stare and said, "I cared enough to stop you before you ruined anyone else." Veronica finally spoke, her tone stripped of all polish. "We didn't mean to ruin you." I looked at her. The same woman who'd edited my life into a scandal. "You meant to erase me," I said. "That's worse." She looked down, the sound of her pen rolling off the table, breaking the quiet like a small apology. Across the room, Rowan read the metadata verification aloud, each timestamp slicing through their denials like truth on paper. Michael muttered, "Maybe I can make this right." But the chairwoman stopped him. "You knew these reports were false. You signed them." His face went pale, the realization settling where his pride used to live. "You didn't think it would go this far," she said. "But you let it." He didn't argue because there was nothing left to defend. Carla gathered the documents, her voice calm as verdicts were read. Angela was referred for prosecution on perjury. Veronica was terminated effective immediately. And Michael was suspended pending misconduct review. I watched each of them react in silence, their power dissolving not in outrage but in quiet disbelief. Carla glanced at me and said, "You wanted truth on paper. There it is." I wad. When they stood to leave, none of them looked back. Angela's steps were uneven, Veronica's eyes unfocused, and Michael's shoulders folded inward as if carrying the weight of his own undoing. I stayed seated, steady, tracing the grain of the table under my fingertips. They used my system against me, I said to Carla. She nodded once, almost smiling. Now it fixed itself. Outside, the late afternoon light fell across the hallway in thin gold lines. For the first time in months, I felt something close to stillness, not victory, not relief. Just the quiet aftermath of truth reclaiming its place. Justice didn't need to be loud. It only needed to be final. Months later, the noise faded. The hearings were over, the files sealed, and my name cleared in every record that mattered. I rented a small apartment near downtown Phoenix, one with enough quiet to hear my own thoughts again. Most mornings I walked to work at the training division, teaching new caseworkers how to recognize false reporting before it ruins someone's life. During one session, a young trainee asked, "How do you stay so calm when people lie?" I told her. "Because panic makes lies louder. Calm makes truth audible." She nodded, writing it down like something to remember. The answer wasn't wisdom, it was survival disguised as advice. Michael reached out once through a text that said, "I made a mistake." I stared at the words until they lost meaning. Then I wrote back, "Apology is noise. Accountability is silence." It wasn't cruelty, it was closure in its simplest form. Some things end not with forgiveness, but with understanding. Veronica resigned before her termination notice arrived. And Angela's name disappeared from every message thread I once dreaded opening. Carla said I should feel vindicated. But I didn't. Vindication still belongs to anger. And I had no use for it anymore. I had traded outrage for something steadier. Peace with proof. One evening I stayed late, reviewing training materials for a new course titled Integrity and Documentation. Rowan stopped by and said, "You turned pain into policy." I smiled and answered, "Justice isn't loud. It's documented." He laughed quietly. The sound of someone who's seen too many endings and still believes in them. When I went home, the sunset brushed the walls of my apartment in pale gold. I stood by the window, watching the city move below, people rushing toward their own small storms, their own truths waiting to surface. For the first time, silence didn't feel empty, it felt earned. I whispered to the room, "For once, peace doesn't need to prove itself." The words settled in the still air and stayed there, exactly where they belonged. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Stories like this remind us that truth doesn't vanish, it waits for someone brave enough to speak it. If you believe peace is the highest form of justice, subscribe and share this story. Your voice helps truth travel further than lies ever could.